All right, welcome to your deep dive. We've got something really interesting to unpack today, and it's all about psychosynthesis.
Yeah, it's a rich area,
Yeah.
lots to explore, especially if you're, someone who's looking for a way to really understand, your own inner workings, how your mind works, how your psyche works.
Exactly. And I think that's our mission here today to really distill what psychosynthesis is all about and how it can help us in our everyday lives.
Totally.
So you saved in some excerpts from Psychosynthesis, A Psychology of the Spirit by Gila. And I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah.
Now, one of the first things that the book talks about is Roberto Assagioli, who actually developed psychosynthesis. And it mentions that it sort of came out of psychoanalysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to admit, I get those two a little confused sometimes.
Yeah.
So can you walk me through, what are the key differences between those two?
Yeah, sure. So psychosynthesis and psychoanalysis, they're often confused because, as you mentioned, Assagioli, he started out working within the framework of psychoanalysis, which many people are familiar with. The idea that, a lot of our unconscious mind and past experiences, especially things that we may have repressed.
Yeah, like those childhood traumas that we always hear about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those have a huge impact on who we are today. But psychosynthesis, while it acknowledges that that's part of the picture, it takes a much broader view.
Okay.
So it doesn't just focus on the unconscious and, the kind of the darker side of things, but it really emphasizes this potential for growth and self-actualization.
Okay.
And even explores what's called the higher unconscious. So this is a realm of creativity, inspiration, even like connection to something larger than ourselves.
Oh, wow. So it's less about dwelling on the past and more about, I guess, reaching for your full potential.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I like that. So the book also talks about this oval diagram that Assagioli uses, and it seems like it's pretty central to understanding psychosynthesis.
It is. It's a visual representation of how he saw, all the different levels of consciousness interacting and working together.
Okay. And I'm a visual learner, so I think seeing this laid out would be super helpful. Can you break that down for me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So imagine you have this oval shape.
Okay.
And right in the center is what's called the middle unconscious.
Oh.
And this is where our daily experiences are kind of, all of our thoughts, feelings, everything we're taking in for the world. That's where it gets processed.
Okay.
Assagioli actually compared it to a psychological gestation period.
Uh-huh.
Where ideas are kind of simmering and developing before they actually reach our conscious awareness.
So it's like a holding area for everything that's going on beneath the surface?
Yeah, exactly. And then below that is the lower unconscious. And this is where we find those repressed experiences, those painful memories, things that we might have, pushed down.
Okay.
Think, primal wounds that stem from maybe unmet needs in childhood, leading to those feelings of shame or worthlessness.
Yeah, it sounds like some heavy stuff down there.
Yeah, it can be tough terrain for sure,
Mm.
but, understanding it is key to growth and healing.
That makes sense. So we've got the middle unconscious, and then below that we've got the lower unconscious. What's at the top?
At the top is the higher unconscious. So this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Think about, our highest aspirations,
Mm-hmm.
our creativity, our intuition, our sense of purpose and meaning.
So it's this whole spectrum of the heights of human potential.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, these aren't static compartments.
Right.
It's not like, they're separate boxes.
Yeah.
The content of the unconscious is constantly in flux. Things are moving between levels and influencing our conscious life all the time.
So it's like an internal ecosystem, right? All these different parts interacting. Now, one of the things that really stood out to me in the book was this concept of subpersonalities.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta admit, that sounds a little scary, having multiple personalities.
I understand the concern, but it's not quite like that.
Okay.
Think of subpersonalities more as different aspects of ourselves or different roles that we take on in life.
Okay.
We all have the worker, the parent, the rebel, the inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
They're normal structures within our personality that help us navigate the world.
So they're not separate personalities vying for control. It's more different modes that we switch into depending on the situation.
Exactly.
Oh.
And, they develop based on our interactions with others and our experiences in the world.
So our relationships, our work, our environment, all of that shapes the subpersonalities that emerge.
Precisely. Yeah. And while they can be really helpful, the book also talks about some of the challenges that can come up with subpersonalities, especially when they're operating in what Assagioli calls survival mode.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what does that mean, survival mode?
So when our subpersonalities, become really rigid, or they get fixated on like protecting us from those primal wounds we talked about.
Okay.
They can actually lead to like compulsive behaviors and inner conflict.
So it's like they're trying to help, but they end up creating more chaos.
Exactly. It's like they're stuck in this loop, replaying old patterns.
Right. So we've got this intricate model of the psyche with all these different moving parts, these levels of consciousness, these subpersonalities. But where do we fit into all of this?
Right.
Like, who's doing the observing?
That is the question. And that's where the concepts of the I and the self come into play. And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, I think we need to unpack that after a quick break. We'll be back in a moment.
Sounds good. So the I and the self, these are huge in psychosynthesis.
Yeah.
For understanding how we relate to all those inner workings, all those different parts.
Okay, before we dive into that, I'm still kind of curious about this idea of reaching our full potential, that seems to be like a big emphasis in psychosynthesis.
Right.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's about recognizing that we're not just, a product of our past experiences, but that we're also beings in constant evolution, like we're always growing and changing. And psychosynthesis actually talks about a journey of self-realization, moving through these different stages of growth.
Stages of growth. Is it like leveling up in a video game or something?
Maybe kind of, yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
each stage presents these different challenges and opportunities, for us to learn and grow. And the first stage is what Assagioli calls survival.
Survival. That sounds intense.
Well, yeah, when we're in survival mode, our energy is really focused on just meeting our basic needs, avoiding pain, clinging to what feels safe.
Yeah.
And it's a stage that's often dominated by, unconscious patterns, reactivity, a limited sense of self.
Yeah, I think we've all been there at some point, right? It's like when you're so stressed out, you just react without even thinking.
Exactly. And while it's a natural part of development, the goal is to move beyond that stage into what's called exploration.
Okay, exploration. So what does that involve? Do we need like a map and compass for that?
Maybe a metaphorical map and compass, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about becoming more aware of our inner landscape. Like really looking at those unconscious patterns, the subpersonalities that we embody, the primal wounds that might be driving our behaviors.
So it's like facing those shadows that we've been avoiding.
Exactly. And it can be really challenging, but it's ultimately incredibly liberating.
Yeah, it sounds like it could be both exciting and kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And then, as we become more conscious of these hidden aspects of ourselves, then we enter the stage of emergence.
Emergence as in like our true selves are starting to emerge.
Yeah, it's about expressing, a more authentic sense of self, integrating those previously hidden parts, developing greater self-empathy. It's a really beautiful stage of growth where we start to step into our power, really owning both our strengths and our vulnerabilities.
I love that. So we've gone from survival to exploration to emergence. Is that it? Is that the final level?
Not quite. The journey continues. The next stage is called contact. And this is where we start to connect with a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. It's like hearing the call of our true self.
Okay, hold on. You said self with a capital S. Is that different from the self we were talking about before?
It is. This is where we get into those key concepts of the I and the self. So think of the I as the center of consciousness, the observer, the part of you that's aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences.
So it's like the me that's experiencing all this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The I is the experiencer, but it's not the content of the experience itself.
Okay.
It's separate from your thoughts, emotions, sensations.
Okay, I think I'm following. So what about the self with a capital S? How does that fit in?
Think of the self as the source of our wisdom, our potential, our connection to something greater than ourselves. It's not a separate entity, but rather a deeper ground of being that we can access through self-awareness and growth.
So it's like this wellspring of potential that's always there, but we need to do the work to tap into it.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And the contact stage is about starting to align with that deeper self, hearing its call and sensing our unique purpose. And then it's followed by the response stage, where we actually take action, putting our purpose into practice in the world.
Wow, that is quite a journey. So it's like this epic quest for self-discovery and fulfillment.
It is.
But it also sounds kind of daunting. Like, where do we even begin to navigate all of this?
Well, the book offers, a variety of techniques and practices.
Yeah.
One that's central to psychosynthesis is the practice of disidentification.
Disidentification, is that like trying to forget who you are?
No, not at all. It's more about recognizing that we are not our thoughts. We are not our emotions. We are not our bodies. We are the I that's aware of all these things, but we're not defined by them.
So it's about creating that separation, that space between the observer and the observed.
Exactly. And the book actually gives a really simple exercise, to practice this. It involves consciously shifting your attention, between your physical sensations, your thoughts, your actions, just observing them without getting caught up in them.
That reminds me a lot of like mindfulness meditation.
You're right. There is a lot of overlap there. The key is to cultivate that awareness, that ability to step back and observe without judgment.
So it's like building that muscle of detachment, being able to witness our inner world without getting swept away by it.
Exactly. And as we practice disidentification, we strengthen our will, our ability to choose how we respond to our experiences rather than just being ruled by them.
Okay, so that's one technique, disidentification. Are there any other practices that stand out?
Another really powerful approach is what's called subpersonality harmonization. So this is about really getting to know those different characters within ourselves, understanding their motivations and finding ways to integrate them into a more cohesive whole.
So it's not about trying to eliminate those parts of ourselves. It's more about helping them work together.
Exactly. It's like you're the conductor of an orchestra, and each subpersonality is like an instrument. The goal is to create a harmonious symphony, not to silence any of the instruments.
I love that analogy. Now, the book also talks about how this work can play out in therapy. Are there any examples that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a case study about a man named Mark who was struggling with this constant inner conflict between two very prominent subpersonalities, the worker and the lover.
Oh, wow.
So the worker was all about productivity and pushing himself relentlessly. And then the lover, craved connection intimacies. Like these two parts of him were at war with each other.
Sounds exhausting.
It was. And, through therapy, Mark was able to connect with each subpersonality, understand their underlying needs and fears. And ultimately, he was able to find ways for them to coexist and even support each other.
So it's like finding that win-win where each part can have its needs met without creating that inner turmoil.
Exactly. And another case that really stood out to me was a woman named Ellen. And she had a really strong survival personality that was preventing her from fully embracing her authentic self.
What was her survival personality like?
So Ellen had this pattern of constantly putting others' needs before her own. She was neglecting her own feelings and desires. She was the classic people pleaser, always trying to keep everyone happy, even at the expense of her own well-being.
I think we all know an Ellen.
Right. It's a
Mm.
common pattern. And for Ellen, it stemmed from childhood experiences where she learned that, her worthiness was contingent on being good and accommodating. It was her way of trying to avoid rejection or disapproval.
So her survival personality was like a shield protecting her from those old wounds.
Exactly. And through therapy, she was able to connect with her inner child.
Yeah.
That wounded part of her that was driving this pattern of self-neglect. And she was able to offer that child compassion and understanding and ultimately, create space for her authentic personality to emerge.
That's so powerful. It's like psychosynthesis allows us to go back and reparent those wounded parts of ourselves, offer them the love and acceptance that they may not have received in childhood.
It's incredibly powerful work. Another important concept that the book emphasizes is empathic mirroring.
Mm.
And it's really crucial, for the development of a healthy, authentic personality.
Okay, so empathic mirroring. Does that involve actual mirrors?
Not in the literal sense. It's about being seen, heard, and understood by others, in a way that reflects our true selves. It's having our inner experience validated and affirmed by someone who can truly hold space for our full range of emotions and experiences.
So it's like having someone reflect back to us the best version of ourselves, even when we can't see it ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And when we receive that kind of mirroring, it helps us develop, a strong sense of self-worth and confidence. But when we don't receive it, especially in childhood, that's where primal wounding can occur.
Primal wounding, that sounds serious.
It can be. It's that deep sense of, not being seen, heard, or understood for who we truly are. And it creates this rupture in our sense of self and our connection to the world.
So I'm starting to see how this all connects. Those primal wounds lead to the development of those survival personalities, which then, drive our behavior in ways that might not be serving us.
You got it. And those survival personalities, they often show up as those walls that we build, to protect ourselves from further hurt.
Walls that keep us safe, but also isolated.
Exactly. And the work of psychosynthesis is about, gently dismantling those walls brick by brick, allowing us to step out into the world as our authentic selves.
This is all making so much sense. So we've talked about these different levels of consciousness, subpersonalities, the stages of growth, the impact of primal wounding. It's like we've been mapping out this whole inner landscape. Are there any like landmarks, any guiding stars that can help us navigate this terrain?
That's a great question. And actually, yes, the book talks about unifying centers.
Unifying centers, what are
Think
those?
of them as those people places or things that help us connect with a sense of wholeness and purpose. They can be external, like supportive relationships, inspiring environments, or a
Mm.
cause that we're passionate about. Or they can be internal, like our values, beliefs, or spiritual
So
practices.
they're like anchors that help us stay grounded and connected to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And they play a really crucial role in both the development and the healing of our personality.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have this whole new way of understanding myself and my own journey.
It's a fascinating field, and there's always more to explore.
Speaking of exploring, we're going to shift gears a bit now and delve into this intriguing realm of transpersonal psychosynthesis.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back and ready to talk about this thing called transpersonal
All
psychosynthesis.
right.
And it sounds like we're moving beyond, just the up-personal into something like bigger.
Yeah, you could say that transpersonal psychosynthesis really is about exploring those experiences that connect us to something beyond our individual ego.
Okay.
A sense of the universal, the transcendent.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I also have to admit, like, I'm a little apprehensive when I hear the word transpersonal. It makes me think of like out-of-body experiences and astral projection,
Yeah.
which isn't really my thing.
I understand it can sound a little woo-woo, but it doesn't have to be about those things.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Think of it more as like expanding our understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're not just these isolated individuals, but that we're part of a larger web of connection.
So it's less about like escaping reality and more about, I guess, deepening our connection to it.
Exactly. It's about exploring, the full spectrum of human experience, including those aspects that might seem mysterious or unexplainable.
Okay.
Think about those moments when you feel a sense of awe in nature or a deep connection with another person, or even, a profound sense of peace during meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Those can all be glimpses into the transpersonal realm.
Okay. That makes me feel a little more grounded.
Yeah.
But, the book also mentions that there are some potential pitfalls when it comes to transpersonal exploration, like this thing called spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
What is that exactly?
So spiritual bypassing is basically when we use spiritual concepts or practices to avoid dealing with like difficult emotions, unresolved trauma, or even just the practical realities of everyday life.
So it's like using spirituality as a way to kind of check out rather than really face ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be tempting to use spirituality as a way to like transcend our humanness rather than embracing it.
Right.
But the problem is, those unresolved issues don't just disappear.
Yeah.
They can actually fester and create problems even within a spiritual context.
That makes sense. It's like trying to build a house on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. So it's important to approach, transpersonal exploration with both enthusiasm and discernment.
Okay.
It's not about rejecting our humanness, but about embracing it, in its fullness, the
Well-
light and the shadow, the joys and the sorrows.
So how can we explore the transpersonal in a way that's both meaningful and grounded?
Well, the book mentions, several different practices, but one that's particularly accessible is meditation.
Hmm.
It can help us quiet the mind, cultivate present moment awareness, and really open us up to a wider field of experience.
I've tried meditation before, but I always get so distracted by my thoughts.
Yeah,
It feels more frustrating than peaceful.
I hear you. It's definitely a practice, and it takes time and patience.
Yeah.
The key is to approach it with a gentle curiosity, not a sense of striving for perfection.
Mhm.
And remember, there are many different types of meditation out there, so you might need to experiment a little bit to find one that really resonates with you.
Right. What about other practices?
Another really powerful practice is service.
Yeah.
Engaging in acts of service, whether it's volunteering in your community or supporting a cause you care about, can really help shift your perspective from like an egocentric focus to a more other-centered focus.
I hadn't thought about service in that way, but it makes sense, connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we shift our focus outward, we often find, a deeper sense of meaning and purpose.
This has been incredible. We've explored the depths of the unconscious, the intricacies of subpersonalities, and even touched on this vast realm of the transpersonal. It's like psychosynthesis offers this roadmap for understanding, the full spectrum of human experience.
Yeah, it's a really rich and insightful approach to personal growth and self-discovery.
And on that note, what final thought-provoking question can we leave our listener with as they continue their own exploration of psychosynthesis?
Hmm. I would ask them this. What aspect of psychosynthesis really sparked your curiosity, and what's one small step you can take today to start integrating that into your life?
That's a great question. So we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and deepening your understanding of yourself. And remember, the journey of self-discovery is ongoing. There's always more to uncover, more to integrate, more to celebrate. Until next time, keep diving deep.